I want to start with a little bit of historical context because this topic is about learning from King's last years and understanding how we are continuing that work. Um, and some text that I've drawn from for this next section. One is a book called Freedom Church of the Poor by Dr. Colleen Wessel McCoy. She is part of our network. The second one is a chapter from a book called Organizing Visions. It's the fourth chapter on the National Welfare Rights Organization by Carolyn Baker of the General Baker Institute and Colleen. And then the third one is from the University of the Poor Journal, an article called The Nonviolent Medicaid Army, A Healthcare Revolution from Below. And we can send out links to these as a follow-up to this session, but I just wanted you to know that I'm going to be drawing on those things. Thank you, Evan, for doing the slides. You can go to the next one. So I think many of us have heard about or learned about some aspects of the civil rights movement. It's familiar, right? We've heard about it. We might have learned something about it in school. We might have seen pictures. We might have seen or heard, King's kind of "I have a dream" speech. These are some of the things that are commonly associated with Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And the civil rights movement between 1954 and 1968 had some really big achievements, right? It was a major movement in this country. Desegregation, the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, equal protection, and it inspired other struggles, right? It inspired the women's movement, movements for LGBTQIA rights, disability justice movements. And yet and still, we don't learn a lot about the end of King's life and the trajectory of his understanding over time. And I think there's a real reason why the ruling class keeps hidden what happened and at the end of his life and how he came to understand things in a different, slightly different way, right? A fundamentally different way, actually, from the premise of the civil rights movement. So we can keep going. So this is a quote from King that kind of encapsulates everything I'm about to say next. And this comes from in the Pennsylvania Poor People's Campaign. We have done a lot of orientation, right, around this topic. And so we pulled from some of that work that's already been done. Would anyone like to read this slide? And you can put your name in the chat if you're down to read. Tammy, please.
Hey, for we know now that it isn't enough to integrate lunch counters. What does it profit a man to be able to eat at an integrated lunch counter if he doesn't have enough money to buy a hamburger? Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., speaking to a rally of sanitation workers in Memphis on March 18th, 1968, 2 weeks before his death.
Thank you, Tammy, and thanks to everybody that's been putting your names in the chat. That's super helpful. So this is a really profound question, right? We got the right to eat at the lunch counter, but then we didn't have enough money to buy a hamburger. So it shows that there was just unfinished business from the civil rights movement, right? It couldn't be the end of the struggle because there was this unfinished business, right? Which is still unfinished, actually. And that's what we're talking about today. So you can go ahead, Evan. Thank you. So these three pivots that King made, Tesha, would you like to read these, please? Or I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name right. You feel free to say it too.
Yes. King made three pivots, one from civil rights to human rights, two from focusing on racism to seeing the total structure that produces racism, poverty, and militarism, three from a period of reform to a period of revolution in technology, weaponry, and human rights.
Thank you so much. So again, drawing from Freedom Church of the Poor, King saw that civil rights could not be fully realized in a society infected with racism, militarism, and poverty. He discerned that these three evils were knotted together structurally, and abolishing them would require a radical restructuring of the architecture of American society. Jason, would you please read the next slide? And Evan, you can go to the next slide. Thank you.
There can be no gainsaying of the fact that the Great Revolution is taking place in the world today. In the sense, it is a triple revolution. That is a technological revolution with the impact of automation and cybernation. Then there is a revolution in weaponry with the emergence of atomic and nuclear weapons of warfare. Then there is the human right revolution with the freedom explosion that is taking place all over the world. MLK's last sermon, March 31st, 1968.
Thank you so much, Jason. So one of the things that I find so powerful about this quote is that King is already noticing the impact of automation and technological revolution on society, right? More than 50 years ago. This is almost 60 years ago now. And our network, the Nonviolent Medicaid Army network, and the other related networks that we're part of, is really keen on understanding that impact of the fourth technological revolution today. So this is another sort of line of descent, right? I don't know that there's that many people in King's time who were lifting up, that many leaders who were actually lifting up and noticing the impact of automation and what was throwing people at that time out of the labor process, out of the workforce altogether, which we're still really keen on understanding. And we feel that it's necessary. It's a necessity to understand that for our time today. So I really appreciate this quote from King. And so we can go to the next one. And Rika, would you please read this one?
We have moved from the era of civil rights to the era of human rights, an era where we are called upon to raise certain basic questions about the whole society. We have been in a reform movement, but after Salem and the Voting Rights Bill, we moved into a new era, which must be the era of revolution. We must recognize that we cannot solve our problem now until there is a radical redistribution of economic and political power. Report to the SCLC staff, May 1967.
Thank you, Rika. Thank you. So again, this is King more than 50 years ago, talking about how we've moved into a new era, which must be an era of revolution. And I want to say that it is no coincidence that he was assassinated shortly after these coming to these conclusions and these understandings. We would be naive to think that that was not a planned carrying that out was not planned by the folks who would have the most to lose and the least to gain from a fundamental transformation of society, that those forces that we are still dealing with today, not only here, but around the globe. Bringing together the people in that meeting that you saw in the Mishika in the beginning, and getting to this conclusion, getting to these understandings is what made King a real threat. Some of the same forces that allied with him in the context of the civil rights movement completely turned their back on him and actually ostracized him when he started to talk about a poor people's movement, uniting the poor and dispossessed across lines of division to fundamentally restructure US society. And Evan, can you please keep going? Thank you. So I'm going to read this one. Here's another quote that helps us understand the evolution of King and King at the end of his life. And where do we go from here? He said, "We made easy gains and we built the kind of organizations that expect easy victories and rest upon them. It may seem curious to speak of easy victories when some have suffered and sacrificed so much." Now pay attention to this next point. "Yet in candor and self-criticism, it is necessary to acknowledge that the torturous job of organizing solidly and simultaneously in thousands of places was not a feature of our work. Many civil rights organizations were born as specialists in agitation and dramatic projects. They attracted massive sympathy and support, but they did not assemble and unify the support for new stages of struggle. To move to high levels of progress, we will have to have people tied together in a long-term relationship instead of evanescent enthusiasts who lose their experience, spirit, and unity because they have no mechanism that directs them to new tasks." And I want to say that this quote is profound. It's a really profound acknowledgement of the limitations of the civil rights movement. And some of them, I think we can still see around us today. And this, I want us to remember this and come back to this, that organizing solidly and simultaneously in thousands of places, which King was saying was not a feature of their work, is a feature of the work of the Nonviolent Medicaid Army on purpose. The entire point here is learning from these lessons that have been handed to us, right? Handed to us by these leaders and taking them forward. So I want to keep going here. Thank you so much, Evan. So just to give a sense of the timeline, I know it helps me to kind of situate things in time. That video that we saw in the beginning, right, where King talked about how power for poor people will mean having the ability, the aggressiveness, the assertiveness, and the togetherness to make the power structure say yes when it really wants to say no. That incredible meeting, the first of its kind, in January 1968. In February 1968, King met with the National Welfare Rights Organization, who actually really educated and helped him understand what was happening with poor people across the country, right? The organizing that was already taking place, that then joined forces, right, into this campaign. But in April, he was assassinated before the launch of the campaign. On May 12th, there was a Mother's Day march featuring some of the folks that we're going to see next, Johnnie, Tillmon, and Beulah Sanders, and others. And then on May 15th was the start of Resurrection City, which was the launch of the campaign in terms of the occupation of the National Mall in Washington, D.C. And the next slide shows you a little bit about that, right? These are the A-frame houses that were set up as part of that campaign on the National Mall. 3,000 people joined together in nonviolent civil disobedience, right, on that National Mall. And you see here a Black family and a white family side by side as part of that Resurrection City. And then we can keep going. So two leaders that I want to lift up here from the welfare rights struggle. And both of these things, King at the end of his life will share out as a follow-up to this too, a great video with Albert Turner, who was one of King's lieutenants. He actually was part of the caravan at King's funeral. He carried his casket. We'll share a video of him speaking at a welfare rights up and out of poverty gathering that happened in Philadelphia in the history of our network. And the National Welfare Rights Organization also deeply tied to the history of our network. So these people have literally passed the baton to us. Beulah Sanders and Johnnie Tillmon were two of the founders and leaders of the National Welfare Rights Organization. And You may not have ever heard of them before, right? But you're hearing about them now. And this is why this history is so critically important. They organized between 1966 and 1975. At their height in 1969, their membership reached 67 chapters and 22,500 people across the country. Yet they're mostly written out of our history. They're mostly not talked about, mostly not understood. Organizing the poor and dispossessed across lines of division. And so we'll go to the next slide to hear a quote and to read a quote from Diane Bernard, who was a later president of the Michigan Welfare Rights Organization. And I'm going to go back up to folks who offered to read. And Joy, would you read this one?
Don't tell me that a white mother who witnessed her 3 children burnt up in a house fire is unfit to lead the struggle. She will fight because she has a personal stake, because they hurt her. Those are the kind of fighters we need. And I follow her anywhere. Anytime we have to embrace those mothers, take them under our wings and give them the ammo they need to fight. That is a proper education about who this enemy is, where the enemy is, and how we go about destroying this enemy. And restricting a restricting a society that could allow children to burn up because you don't have money to pay for gas, and natural gas is so plentiful in this country that nobody should have to pay for it.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you. Thank you. And yeah, more folks offering to read, appreciate that so much. We'll get you in there. So this is a lesson, right? An understanding of this legacy that is not taught to us, that is not widely understood, but is focused, right? This is what is Diane Bernard saying here, right? She's talking about organizing people at the point of survival, organizing people on the basis of their fundamental relationship to the economic system of this country, not on the basis of their race, not on the basis of their political party, not on the basis of their stated beliefs, on the basis of their concrete material position in relationship to this society and the economic structures of the society. And that is exactly what we're doing here in the Nonviolent Medicaid Army. And this is why we talk about this as a deep part of our legacy, learning from King's last years, learning from the National Welfare Rights Organizing, history of the poor organizing the poor, not being organized by the big foundations, not being organized by the two parties of Wall Street, but us organizing ourselves to understand. Another really powerful quote from King is the prescription for the cure rests with the accurate diagnosis of the disease. And we have to get that accurate diagnosis if we're going to have a real prescription for the cure, right, that ails us. So here's our historical grounding, and now we're going to talk about understanding for us in the Nonviolent Medicaid Army, what does this mean? And how are we applying these historical lessons directly into our work today? And I'll pass it over to you, Mark.
Thanks so much, Najmi. Thank you so much for laying out that history. As you said, this is not a history that we're taught. It's a history that is intentionally buried because it is a dangerous and agitating history to be able to learn, and one that unites people together, which is exactly what the ruling class doesn't want. And I'm just thinking about we are fast approaching Martin Luther King Day, and the story around King that is put out there and that is sanitized and that we're fed, that is very different from this history. And so, as you said, we'll now think a little bit about how we take that legacy, how we take that lineage, and what does that look like for us on the ground. And starting first from the point that you left off around the National Welfare Rights Organization and Beulah Sanders and Johnnie Tillmon, and organizing at this point of survival, meeting people in their actual material struggle when we are faced against these structures that maintain poverty. And we are doing that primarily in the last few years. We've been doing this with our Medicaid cutoff organizing drive. Now, there has been a lot of discussion. We're thinking a lot about these Medicaid cutoffs that have happened in the last year, but we've been organizing around these cutoffs well before the current round of cutoffs. We've been organizing around them during the Medicaid purge that started under Biden. That's often called, kind of sanitized to be called the Medicaid unwinding, because we know that neither of our parties of the ruling class have our survival as a priority. And we saw those cuts coming under Biden, and we knew that this was something that was affecting the very survival of our class, affecting the survival of the people in this country. And so we are facing the entire structure that upholds poverty at the same time that it creates wealth, and meeting people at that point of losing their healthcare, losing their ability to stay healthy, regardless of whether they voted Republican or voted Democrat, or whether they can use the right language to talk about politics or to talk about social justice, but to say that people are in a fight for their survival and we can meet them there to do that. And we did that in these ways, and we'll talk a little bit about each of these things, but Medicaid signups and appeals, people's clinics and projects of survival, Medicaid Mondays and story sharing, nonviolent direct action, and some call-in days. And we'll go a little bit into each of those, so you can move to the next slide. So starting with Medicaid appeals. Again, in these cutoffs, both under Biden and the current new round of cutoffs, people are losing their healthcare because of just arbitrary decisions from our system as it tries to kick people off of this system that maintains their survival. And so we're meeting people where they are. We're highlighting where our system is failing and developing our own power to give people what they need to survive, right? We are bringing the fight to the system by saying, this is a decision you made. We are not going to take this lying down. We can unite with our people and go through the process of appealing for their Medicaid being denied. And we've done that in states across the country and have won. By and large, when we do that, we win, because the system does not expect people to fight back in this way, right? It expects people to receive this decision, and the process is so overwhelming, so difficult, that there's no way to do this on your own. And we don't do it on our own. We come together, we develop our skills, and we learn how to fight back and challenge these arbitrary and cruel decisions that are being passed down. And we build our own power as we do that. You can go to the next slide. Another way we meet people at that point of survival is by holding activities, these projects of survival, where we're meeting people's direct survival needs. And at the same time, again, building that capacity and exposing the gaps in our systems that leave people to die. We do that through people's clinics, where we're providing basic medical or clinical care services that should be able to be received in your doctor's office, or should be received by a healthcare provider, but most people in this country can't get that basic service. We do that through food distribution. We know that especially now with the cuts to SNAP, it is harder and harder for people to get the most basic necessity, which is food. And we're meeting people at that point of survival, providing that need, and also connecting to people on those stories, highlighting how this is a failure of our system, and bringing people into long-term organization in that way. And again, these are photos from people's clinics across the country. And so we are doing this as a tactic in almost all of our states in different ways across the country, in a consistent way to meet our people. Go to the next slide. And I mentioned these last two. A part of what we're doing is highlighting the experiences and highlighting the stories of loss of healthcare and the struggle that people are going through. And one way that we are sharing those stories is through our Medicaid Mondays campaign, which has been ongoing now for a number of years. And this is a campaign using social media on Mondays, using the hashtag Medicaid Monday, where people can share their story of healthcare, of the need for healthcare, of the importance for healthcare, or how people have lost their healthcare because of these arbitrary decisions that are made by our system. And in this way, people can, both change the narrative around healthcare, change the narrative around poverty by changing the narrator, by changing who is telling that story, and also allows us to break the isolation that we are put under by saying that, I'm not the only one experiencing this. I'm not the only one facing facing this loss of healthcare. This is actually something that's happening to thousands of people across the country. And I'm not alone in this. In fact, this is probably one of the most common experiences that someone can have in this country, is having your healthcare under threat. And if that's the case, then we should be able to connect around that, regardless of our race, religion, political party that we vote for. We can come together because these stories are the same. And so that's great. Thanks, Evan. So that is how we have been coming together, meeting people at that point of survival, specifically around these Medicaid cutoffs, and also SNAP cutoffs and other cutoffs to basic points of survival. And as we do that, we can move into the second lesson, the second point of lineage we've taken from King, which is moving from mobilization to organization. And speaking to one of the quotes that Nijmi read earlier, which I think about a lot and was really kind of like a light bulb moment for me, this point of self-criticism that he had, right? Of being in this moment in the civil rights movement, of having people who were trained to be agitators and to bring in sympathy from masses of people. And then the point of criticism is that they had not done the work of solidly and simultaneously organizing in thousands of places. And that is the lesson, that is the task he put forward for the coming years. And so that is the task that we have taken on, right? So moving from mobilization, moving from generating mass sympathy into actually connecting and building what we call permanently organized communities, right? How do we stay connected to each other in a political way in thousands of places across the country? And again, we see some photos here of different gatherings and different points of organization we have, again, across the entire country, where we are not just coming together to put on a march every weekend, to have people out in the streets, which can be really powerful and can mean a lot. Well, we are also taking that and building kind of deep organizational capacity, building these communities of people, and taking on that task that King set for the organization. I can go to the next slide. Okay, so that was connecting with our base, connecting with people at the point of survival to build these permanently organized communities. And then we can also think about another lesson we've taken, another point in our lineage, is thinking about how we attack this entire structure that upholds poverty, right? And he highlights points of that structure. It's militarism, it's racism. We can include kind of attacks against the environment, as we think into the modern day as well. And so if we are attacking the structure that has all of these pieces and all of these facets, then we need to be able to come together as multiple different types of organization that can fight on different fronts of struggle. And this just shows a few of the organizations that are part of our broad network that are meeting this structure that upholds poverty in different places and in different ways. The National Union of the Homeless, we have the Vermont Workers Center, we have the Housing and Health Rights Coalition in Richmond, Indiana. So people bringing together these different struggles in different ways. And then in particular, one piece of struggle, one front of struggle that we are fighting is this battle for the Bible, this cultural and narrative struggle to take back the Bible and take back the narratives of Christianity and of faith into what it truly was from the beginning, which is the story of power for the poor and power for the people. And so being able to, if we are to fight this multi-headed hydra of a structure, we need to be able to fight it along all of those fronts of struggle and all of those facets as well. And so we are doing that in our work, and again, a lesson that we've taken and drawn from King's last years. And then can move on to the next one. Wonderful, great. So something I was thinking about as Nijmi was talking is these ideas that King came to after years and years and years of being in the civil rights movement, of learning and experiencing this struggle, right? And that is in part because of the way that I think about it with us is in part because of the messaging and the propaganda about what the political structure looks like and what are the fights that we are supposed to be in, the fights that he was supposed to be in. And we face that similar propaganda, right? We are the most propagandized people in the world. We're told these messages about how we're supposed to fight, who the enemy is, what we're supposed to do to change the conditions of our lives. And it took King an entire civil rights movement to get to these ideas. And so for us to get there, for us to maintain those ideas, we need to be able to sharpen our analysis and build our analysis together, and maintain and continue to further the thinking that started to be developed towards King's last years. And we do that in collective study in a few different ways. You're in one right now, surprise. We have these like monthly sessions called our Saturday schools, the first Saturday of every month, with some slight exceptions for different holidays, but the first Saturday of every month, where we come together and we collectively learn about a specific topic that links to our struggle. We also have national calls the last Thursday of every month. You can see the times there on the page, where again, we come together, we learn about what is happening in our struggles across the state. How can we learn from each other? How can we build our movement forward? And then we also have dedicated seasonal studies that are deep dives into a period of history or a topic, where we can develop our analysis together. And all of these forms of study we do across all our organizations, across our network, and across our country. So we are coming together in these spaces to learn together and develop our analysis collectively. And again, doing what King was beginning to do at the end of his life, and taking that forward and developing that analysis that he had come through. Okay. And then, thanks, Tasha, I see your hand, and I'm gonna get through a couple more slides and then maybe have a few moments for some discussion or comments, and definitely more discussion in the small groups as we break out. These last few points, I'm glad that we're ending on these, because I think this is something that I think we need to be thinking about and talking about more. And I think something that is in folks' minds, especially right now, is that we are in a moment where we have bombs from this country, from the US, dropping in Gaza, dropping in Venezuela. We have military intervention from the US in places around the world, often in places we might not even know that the US is intervening in. And we are able to see the horrors that is caused by war generated in the US. And we need to be able to see how that is connected to the ongoing war that the US is waging against the poor here, right? The same system that is funding those bombs, funding that military apparatus that is able to go into Venezuela, that same system is the one that is depriving people here of homes and of food and of healthcare, right? So those fights are the same fight. And those have to be linked together. And when we build our analysis, when we understand why the US is intervening, the US is invading Venezuela and dropping bombs in Venezuela, why that's connected to what it is doing here to the poor and the wars it is waging in the poor. And that connects to the last slide we can go to, which is that as we build that analysis, as we understand that the system that is killing people abroad is also killing people at home, what that allows us to do is understand that we are part of a global working class that needs to unite together, right? I think these are some images from work that the NVMA has done with our partners in other parts of the world, in particular in Cuba, where we've sent brigades and united with organizations that are militant and revolutionary organizations there as well, to learn from and to share our own lessons. And I think something that we can develop, drawing again from this lineage that King and the messages that King was saying at the end of his life, is that we are not just allies in a fight in the third world, right? We are not the US over here trying to support struggles against oppression in other parts of the world. We are part of a global working class, where our role is as a working class and as the poor in the US, united with the poor in other countries, to be able to form a single international working class, right? And positioning ourselves in that way is I think a different way than we often think about our work globally or our work internationally. And so we can think about the struggles that we have here within our own borders, within our own regions, as connected and as part of the same struggle that other members of the working class have internationally as well. And how do we build those connections? How do we build those relationships, build those connections within our analysis, and also build actual material connections with people and with communities and with organizations who are doing that same work? And so it's a lot that King has left us with, as I'll say. There's a lot of things that we have to take forward. But I think in these ways, we've been able to build on the analysis and build on the work that he has started and are putting it into our organizing practice, right? In the ways that we're meeting our base, in the ways that we're building our organization and doing this work of base building and not just mobilizing, and in the ways that we are connecting, both analytically connecting what is happening at home with what's happening abroad, and also actually connecting with that work through this working class internationalism. And I'll pass it back to Nijmi to kind of bring us together before we go into our small groups.
Thank you so much, Mark. We can send some other things out after this as well. We have some really powerful writings on this topic of working class internationalism in light of recent events. So just to summarize, again, because this is a lot, right? And we always want to repeat some of the key things that we want to take away. We saw how King made these pivots at the end of his life. He brought together that historic meeting, and then very shortly after that, he was assassinated. And guess what? That did what it was intended to do, which was take the wind out of the sails of the movement. And even though the Poor People's Campaign did move ahead and it did make some advances, King didn't have the time that he needed to really build the kind of leadership, the unity, and the strategy among those people in that meeting that was necessary. And that's why we talk about many Martins today. Many Martins, many Johnnies, many Johnnie Tillmons, many Beulah Sanders, that we need many leaders, not just one leader, because that's always a liability, right? And so that's the purpose of our process of our struggle together, our organization, and our educational process, right, is to build many leaders. Like all of us here today are necessary. Our leadership is necessary for this movement to abolish poverty. Another takeaway is this question of organizing at the point of survival. This will become more and more clear, I think, as we see all around us how we are being thrown out of work. And our fight becomes a direct fight with the state for survival. That we are here to unite the poor and dispossessed working class across all lines of division. Again, what King was doing, the pivot that he made, the message that comes from our ancestors in the welfare rights movement. Remember that quote from Diane Bernard? That is where they were pointing us. That's the direction that they were pointing us in terms of what is actually needed, right, to make a fundamental transformation of society. To organize solidly and simultaneously in thousands of places. This is incredibly important. This is why we organize in the Nonviolent Medicaid Army across that urban-rural divide. We organize in every county, in every state. We want to be organized in every place, solidly and simultaneously building permanently organized communities. Using our organizing drives, our Healthcare as a Human Right campaign, our fights for housing, for health, for other basic needs, and struggles at the point of survival to build permanently organized communities. Our political independence. We are political. Everything we do is political. We engage with the political system, but we don't fool ourselves into thinking that the two parties of Wall Street are going to save us, because change comes from below, not from above. So we will participate. We will be active politically, but we will not be instructed. We will not be organized by those political forces. We will organize our political independence from below. And we will understand and confront the structure underneath all fronts of struggle. So we will understand that the same state that is moving on Venezuela is the same state that has cut 25 million people off of Medicaid starting in 2023 and will continue to do that, that is imposing work requirements on SNAP. We will understand that these are different manifestations of the same fundamental problem. And our task as organizers and strategists, right? 2,000 years of military strategy and history, going back to Sun Tzu, says that we have to throw our strength at the enemy's weakness. We can't throw our strength at their strength because they have us outgunned. They have us, they've outmediated, outmighted. What we can do is outmaneuver them. And that's where our fight around healthcare, organizing at the point of survival, uniting millions of people who stand to be united comes in. That's a strength for us. We have to focus on that strength because these aren't all different issues. We can't let the folks that have been killed by ICE, we can't let their deaths be in vain, but we also can't get confused that the 800 people who died today from poverty, who are going to be dying today in this country from poverty and every single day, if we allow ourselves to think that that's separate, if we allow ourselves to think that, well, that was their fault, that's different, they did something, that's on them, right? Then that's the ruling class, in our minds, making us think that these things are separate. And we can't allow that to happen. We can't allow any of their deaths to be in vain. So these are some of our takeaways from today.